By
My name
2018,
is Rosa Vega.
it was valued at
I'm
approximately
41 years old.
$290,000.
The week my husband
was rented
died,
consistently,
my family held
and
a
was
meeting.
producing income
I was
that
not
went primarily
invited to the
toward its
meeting.
own mortgage.
I was in a
The
hospital
Big Bear
room,
cabin
and then I was in a funeral home,
and then I was in the most terrible days of understanding that
We
the
had talked
person I
about
had
it for
spent
years
18
before we
years
did
with
it.
was gone
A
and
place
was not
in the
coming
mountains,
back.
somewhere
And while
we
I
could
was
go
doing
on
those
weekends.
things,
Somewhere
my mother
with a
and my
different
brother and my
quality
sister
of
sat
air
down
and
together
silence from
and
the
made a
valley.
set of decisions
When we
that
finally
they would not
bought
tell
it
me
in
about for 7 months.
2014, a
When I found
3-bedroom
out,
cabin
not
on half
from
an
them,
acre,
but from
it
a real
felt like
estate
something
attorney
we
who
had
had been
earned
trying
by
to
the
reach
waiting.
me about a
We
signature that was
loved
needed,
that cabin
and who,
in a way
in
that
the process
was
of
different
explaining
from
why
how
the
we
signature
felt
was
about
needed,
the other properties.
inadvertently told
It
me
was not
something that caused the
primarily
entire
an
constructed
investment.
reality of
It
those
was
7 months to
primarily
collapse.
ours.
I sat in
By
my
the
car
time
for 2
Marcus
hours,
died in March
not
2018,
crying,
our
not
total real estate
screaming,
equity was
just
approximately
sitting.
$650,000.
Because what I had just been told
We
was
had
not
some
the kind of
additional
information
investments,
that produces
retirement
an
accounts,
immediate
a
response.
modest savings account.
It was the
a
kind
small
of information
brokerage account
that
produces
produces a
maintained.
complete revision
The
of
total
everything
estate
you
was
think you have been
substantial,
living
but
through,
not
and
dramatically
revision
so.
takes time.
We were
My
comfortable
husband
people
Marcus had
who
died
built
in March
carefully
2018.
over 14 years.
He was
What I did not
47
know,
years old.
in the immediate
A
aftermath
stroke,
of Marcus's
sudden,
death,
no
was
warning,
the complete
a
shape
Tuesday
of our
afternoon.
legal and financial
He was a high school
arrangements.
vice principal.
This is
and
not
he
a
had been at his
criticism
desk,
of
and then
Marcus.
he was not.
We had
And
talked
by the
about
time
our
the
estate
ambulance
planning
arrived,
in
there was
general
very
terms.
little to do.
I knew
We had
had
no
wills.
children.
I knew
This was
the
a choice
basic
we had
structure.
made consciously and
what
fully,
I did not
and that
know
I had
were the
never
specific
regretted,
details,
and that in the
specific
aftermath of
documents,
Marcus's death,
specific provisions
with a new
that Marcus
and
had made
quality,
and kept
the
organized
particular
in the
aloneness
safe
of
deposit
being a
box
widow
at the
with
bank.
no children.
I did
which
not
is
go
different
to the
from
safe
aloneness
deposit
of
someone
someone
whose
whose children
children
have
have
grown and left.
in those 7
because
months.
there is no one
My
to whom your
family
grief
made
is
decisions.
also personal in the
The
same
meeting
way.
my family
What
held
we
the week
did
of
have
Marcus's
was
death.
property.
The meeting to
A
which
house
I was
in
not
Riverside,
invited,
California,
was the beginning
where
of
we had
something
lived
that
since
unfolded gradually,
2004,
and whose
a
full
small
shape
rental
I would
property
not
in
understand
Palm
for a
Springs
long
that
time.
Marcus had
My
purchased
mother
in
came to
2010
Riverside
as
for
an
the
investment.
funeral. And
So
a
did
vacation cabin in
Alejandro
Big Bear
and
that had been
Isabel.
purchased in
They stayed
2014,
for several days,
when Marcus's
which was
income
appropriate
as an
and which I
administrator
was
had
grateful
reached a
for.
point where the purchase
During those
made
days,
sense. I was in the
we had
specific
built
fog
these
of early
things
acute
together.
grief that is both
14
overwhelming
years
and
of
strangely
building.
concrete.
They were
There are so
ours.
many things to do
After
when someone
Marcus
dies.
died,
So many
they
calls to
became a
make and
question.
forms to complete.
The question
and
was
arrangements
answered
to
by my
finalize
family in
that
ways
the
I had
enormity
not
of the loss
authorized
cannot
and
be
had
fully
not been
felt
consulted
until the
about.
doing is done.
During the 7
I
months,
did not
I was
notice
too
the
deep in
meeting
grief
because
to track
I was
what
not
was happening
there for
around
it.
me.
I
What
found
came
out
out
about
of the
it
safe
much
deposit
later
box
from
a
Isabel,
metal box that
who told
Marcus
me
had kept
in
in
a
a bank
context
in
that
Riverside
was intended
that I
as
had
an
known about
explanation
but had
for
not
something
thought
else,
to access
and then
inadvertently
inadvertently
disclosed
that
more than
contained
she had
documents
intended
I had
to
not
share.
seen before.
The
And
meeting
that told
had
a story
been
about
at
my husband's
Alejandro's
careful preparation
suggestion.
for a
He
possibility
had called my
he had
mother
not
and
shared with
Isabel,
me,
and they had
changed
gathered at my
everything.
mother's house in
I
Pomona,
am here to tell you
40
this
minutes
whole
from Riverside,
story
where I was,
from the beginning,
and they had discussed,
tell
as
me
a family,
in the comments
the situation
where
that
you're watching
Marcus's
from.
death had
If you have
created.
ever been
The
vulnerable
situation,
at exactly
as
the wrong
Alejandro
moment,
had framed it,
in exactly
was
the
this:
way that someone
Rosa
took
was
advantage
going to be
of.
overwhelmed.
This story is for you.
Rosa was
I need
going
to
to
start
be
with
in
my
grief,
family, because
Rosa
you cannot
was not
understand
in a
what
position
happened
to
without
manage a
understanding who
complex
they are
estate
and what our
situation
history
alone.
had been before
The
March
family
2018.
needed to step in and
My
help
mother,
manage things
Esperanza
so that
Vega,
nothing fell through
is
the
73
cracks.
years old.
This framing was
She was
not
born in
entirely
Guadalajara
wrong.
and came to
I was
California
overwhelmed.
in 1975.
I was in grief.
She is a woman
I would
of
not
real
have managed
practical
the estate
intelligence
situation
and real
well in
emotional
those first
limitations.
months if it
And
had
these two
required
things are
active
not
management.
contradictory in her.
What the framing
They are the
obscured was
specific
what helping
combination
manage
that her
things
particular
actually
history
meant
produced.
and what the family
She
intended
grew up
to
in a
do with
household that
management.
valued competence
Alejandro's
over feeling,
specific
that
proposal,
understood
which my
survival
mother
to
and
require the
Isabel
management of
accepted,
resources,
was that he
rather
would
than
work
the
with a real
management of
estate attorney
relationships,
to begin
and that
organizing
organized
the property
itself
situation
accordingly.
while I was
She
grieving.
has spent her
That he
life
would manage
doing
the
the
same.
paperwork,
She
the
loves her
communications,
children,
the logistics.
I believe this
that by the time
completely
I was
and
ready to
without
deal with these
reservation.
things, what
The
she has
groundwork
struggled to
would
do
already be
throughout
laid.
her life
What
is to love
groundwork
them
he
in
was
ways
laying
that
was
not
not
fully
them.
specified
She
to my
sees
mother
what they
and
need
Isabel
in practical
or if
terms.
it was specified,
She is
what
less
was
reliable
specified was
at
not
not what was actually intended. In the spring and early summer of 2018,
46 years
while I
old.
was working through the first stage of grief,
older than
Alejandro made a
He is the
series of
family's
contacts
businessman
and
He
initiations
has run
that I was
various
not
commercial
informed about.
enterprises over the
He
years with
contacted
varying
the
success,
property manager
has
of the
always had
Palm
strong
Springs
opinions
condo.
about money and
He
property
told them
and
he was
investment,
working on
and
behalf
has
of the
always
family to
positioned himself
coordinate
as the
matters
family's
related to the
authority
estate
on financial
and asked
matters
for
whether
rental
or not
income
that
information
authority was
and
warranted in
maintenance
a given
records.
situation.
He contacted
My
the
sister
property
Isabel
association
is
at Big
37
Bear
years
and made
old.
inquiries about
She
the
is
cabin
4
status
years younger
and about
than me.
processes for
She has
changing the
always been the
registered
family
contact
member
for the
most
property.
aligned with my mother.
He retained a
They
real
share
estate
a quality
attorney,
of
not an
practicality
estate
that makes
attorney,
them
a
natural
real
allies,
estate attorney,
and they have
and began
operated
discussions
as a unit
about a
within the
potential
family in ways
restructuring
that,
of the property
depending on the
holdings.
situation,
He
were
also
either
had a
functional or
conversation with my
exclusionary.
mother,
sometime in May 2018, in terms of the family's emotional configuration, much later, though not in this conversation. I was proposed that the Palm Springs property and the Big Bear to Riverside, both of which had no remaining family emotional connection without Marcus, should be sold and the proceeds used to address the one family who had established the family needs Alejandro specified included this business investment he wanted to make, which he described as a near certain inconvenient financial assistance because it meant I was less available for the specific forms of involvement that families require retirement situation. I was not present for the ordinary Tuesdays would have wanted. I was not the one Rosa who handled things when she was not too deep in grief. What I was clearly in the family's understanding best was the one who had the most. My mother, the house who trusted Alejandro's financial judgment in the automatic way of someone who has deferred to a capable eldest son with a good salary. A professional life of my own, who had worked as a financial coordinator, and who had never had strong objections to decisions that helped her, said yes. From the outside, neither of them appears to have thought carefully about what yes this assessment in this situation was not wrong, or about whether Alejandro had the authority to do what he was proposing. Marcus and I had been building that since 2004. By July 2018, the house in Riverside was purchased when I was found a buyer for the Big Bear 33. The buyer was a business associate of his. We stretched a man named Gerald Torres, who was interested in the first 3 years while we paid down enough principal. The purchase price was $320,000, which was below the property's market value. The house was worth an appraisal done the following year would establish the market value carried a remaining mortgage as approximately $375,000. The Palm Springs property was presented to the family as a good price obtained quickly. Marcus had a specific interest required real estate as a financial surviving spouse, and he had studied the holder of carefully before purchasing. I did not sign it. A 2-bedroom condo in a complex with a good rental record was acquired in 2010 for $160,000. By 2018, it was valued at approximately $290,000, was rented consistently, and was producing income that went primarily toward its own mortgage. The Big Bear cabin was the purchase I had been most emotionally invested in. We had talked about it for years before we did it. A place in the mountains, somewhere we could go on weekends, somewhere with a different quality of air and silence from the valley. When we finally bought it in 2014, a 3-bedroom cabin on half an acre, it felt like something we had earned by the waiting. We loved that cabin in a way that was different from how we felt about the other properties. It was not primarily an investment. It was primarily ours. By the time Marcus died in March 2018, our total real estate equity was approximately $650,000. We had some additional investments, retirement accounts, a modest savings account, a small brokerage account Marcus had maintained. The total estate was substantial but not dramatically so. We were comfortable people who had built carefully over 14 years. What I did not know, in the immediate aftermath of Marcus's death, was the complete shape of our legal and financial arrangements. This is not a criticism of Marcus. We had talked about our estate planning in general terms. I knew we had wills. I knew the basic structure. What I did not know were the specific details, specific documents, specific provisions, that Marcus had made and kept organized in the safe deposit box at the bank. I did not go to the safe deposit box for 7 months. In those 7 months, my family made decisions. The meeting my family held the week of Marcus's death, the meeting to which I was not invited, was the beginning of something that unfolded gradually and whose full shape I would not understand for a long time. My mother came to Riverside for the funeral. So did Alejandro and Isabel. They stayed for several days, which was appropriate and which I was grateful for. During those days, I was in the specific fog of early acute grief that is both overwhelming and strangely concrete. There are so many things to do when someone dies, so many calls to make and forms to complete and arrangements to finalize, that the enormity of the loss cannot be fully felt until the doing is done. I did not notice the meeting because I was not there for it. I found out about it much later, from Isabel, who told me in a context that was intended as an explanation for something else, and that inadvertently disclosed more than she had intended to share. The meeting had been at Alejandro's suggestion. He had called my mother and Isabel and they had gathered at my mother's house in Pomona, 40 minutes from Riverside, where I was, and they had discussed, as a family, the situation that Marcus's death had created. The situation, as Alejandro had framed it, was this: Rosa was going to be overwhelmed. Rosa was going to be in grief. Rosa was not in a position to manage a complex estate situation alone. The family needed to step in and help manage things so that nothing fell through the cracks. This framing was not entirely wrong. I was overwhelmed. I was in grief. I would not have managed the estate situation well in those first months if it had required active management. What the framing obscured was what helping manage things actually meant and what the family intended to do with the management. Alejandro's specific proposal, which my mother and Isabel accepted, was that he would work with a real estate attorney to begin organizing the property situation while I was grieving. That he would manage the paperwork, the communications, the logistics. That by the time I was ready to deal with these things, the groundwork would already be laid. What groundwork he was laying was not fully specified to my mother and Isabel. Or if it was specified, what was specified was not what was actually intended. In the spring and early summer of 2018, while I was working through the first stage of grief, Alejandro made a series of contacts and initiations that I was not informed about. He contacted the property manager of the Palm Springs condo. He told them he was working on behalf of the family to coordinate matters related to the estate and asked for rental income information and maintenance records. He contacted the property association at Big Bear and made inquiries about the cabin's status and about processes for changing the registered contact for the property. He retained a real estate attorney, not an estate attorney, a real estate attorney, and began discussions about a potential restructuring of the property holdings. He also had a conversation with my mother, sometime in May 2018, that Isabel told me about much later. In this conversation, he proposed that the Palm Springs property and the Big Bear cabin, both of which had no remaining family emotional connection without Marcus, should be sold and the proceeds used to address certain family needs. The family needs Alejandro specified included a business investment he wanted to make, which he described as a near-certain opportunity, financial assistance for Isabel, who had been in some difficulty, and a contribution to my mother's retirement situation. He framed this as what Marcus would have wanted, as what Rosa would want, once she was not too deep in grief to think clearly, as what was best for the whole family. My mother, who trusted Alejandro's financial judgment in the automatic way of someone who has deferred to a capable eldest son for decades, said yes. Isabel, who had her own financial pressures and who had never had strong objections to decisions that helped her, said yes. Neither of them appears to have thought carefully about what yes actually meant in this situation, or about whether Alejandro had the authority to do what he was proposing. He did not have that authority. By July 2018, Alejandro had found a buyer for the Big Bear cabin. The buyer was a business associate of his, a man named Gerald Torres, who was interested in vacation properties as rentals. The purchase price was $320,000, which was below the property's market value. An appraisal done the following year would establish the market value at the time of sale as approximately $375,000, but was presented to the family as a good price obtained quickly. The transaction required my signature, as the surviving spouse and the holder of title to the property. I did not sign it. What happened instead was something I still find difficult to think about clearly. My signature appears on the documents. Alejandro has never explained to me specifically how this occurred. In all the conversations we have had since I discovered what happened, he has been evasive about the mechanical question of how my signature came to be on those documents when I did not sign them. The transaction closed in August 2018. I did not know. I was in Riverside, dealing with my husband's death, going to my grief support group on Tuesday evenings, trying to figure out how to live in a house that was organized around 2 people when there was now 1. I was not thinking about the Big Bear cabin. I had not been to the Big Bear cabin since Marcus died. I could not. The proceeds from the sale, $320,000 less the remaining mortgage and transaction costs, a net of approximately $215,000, went into a bank account Alejandro had set up for what he called estate management. From there, over the following several months, they went to various destinations. His business investment. Isabel's debt relief. A contribution to my mother's savings account. Approximately $40,000 remained in the estate management account when everything else had been distributed. This $40,000 was what Alejandro intended to tell me the estate had produced when he eventually disclosed the sale to me. He was planning to tell me about it as a completed thing, as a helpful thing he had done on my behalf, as evidence of his competent management during a difficult period. He had not yet told me when the real estate attorney made the call that changed everything. The call came in October 2018, 7 months after Marcus died. I was at my desk at work. A Friday afternoon. The call was from a law firm in Riverside, not Alejandro's attorney, a different firm that had been handling communications related to the Palm Springs property. The attorney explained that she was reaching out because there was documentation that needed my signature for a property matter. She assumed I had been in contact with her office previously and was following up. I told her I had no idea what she was talking about. There was a pause. She said, "I'm calling about the sale of the Palm Springs condominium. We've been working with your brother Alejandro on the transaction. I understood you were aware." "I'm not aware," I said. "The Palm Springs property is being sold?" Another pause. Longer. "Ms. Vega," she said slowly, "I think there may be a significant misunderstanding here that we need to address directly." She walked me through what she knew. The Palm Springs condo had been under negotiation for sale since September. The buyer had been identified, terms had been discussed, documentation had been prepared. What had not yet occurred was my signature, which was required because I was the title holder. She had been operating under the understanding, conveyed through Alejandro, that I was aware of and had approved the transaction in principle, and that the signature step was a formality. I told her I had not approved any transaction. I told her I had not been informed of any transaction. I told her to put everything on hold. Then I asked her something. "The Big Bear property," I said. "Is there anything in your files about the Big Bear cabin?" She said she didn't have anything about a Big Bear property. I said thank you. I hung up. I went to my car in the parking garage. I sat there for 2 hours. Then I drove to the bank where Marcus had kept the safe deposit box. I had the key. Marcus had shown it to me when we opened the account, had told me where he kept the key, had said this is where the important documents are in the calm, organized way he said most things. I had not thought about the safe deposit box in 7 months. Not once. In the fog of early grief and the consuming practical work of managing a death, the safe deposit box had simply not occurred to me. I signed in at the bank. I gave them my identification. I was confirmed as an authorized user of the box. Marcus had added me when we opened it, which was a detail I had forgotten and which mattered. They brought me to the room. They put the box on the table. I opened it. Inside were the documents Marcus had organized and kept. Our wills. Insurance policies. Property deeds. The deed to the Riverside house. The deed to the Palm Springs condo. The deed to the Big Bear cabin. I looked at the Big Bear cabin deed. And then I found something I had not expected. A second folder, separate from the main documents, labeled in Marcus's handwriting. Important, for Rosa only. Inside the folder were 4 things. The first was a letter from Marcus. I will come back to this. The second was a copy of our will, with certain provisions highlighted. The provisions made clear that all property held jointly was to pass to me as the surviving spouse, and that any disposition of that property prior to probate clearance would require my explicit consent and my signature as the surviving joint tenant. The third was a document I had not seen before. A written instruction, signed and notarized by Marcus in 2017, addressed to the executor of his estate, which was me, specifically noting his concern that certain family members might attempt to influence estate decisions during a grief period and specifically directing the executor to take no property actions for a minimum of 90 days following the date of death. The fourth was a business card, clipped to a handwritten note. The business card was for an estate attorney named Christine Park. The note said, "Call Christine if anything seems wrong. She knows everything." I stared at that note for a long time. Marcus had known. Not that he was going to die, he had been healthy, he had had no warning of the stroke. But he had known something about my family. He had known that my family had a specific set of behaviors around property and money that might become activated under certain conditions, and he had quietly and carefully prepared for that possibility. He had not told me. I have thought about why he did not tell me, and I have landed on the most likely explanation, because telling me would have required him to say things about my family that he believed would be painful and that were not necessary to say unless they became necessary. He had prepared the protection without needing to explain the thing he was protecting against. This was so entirely him. The quiet organization. The preparation done in the background while life continued in the foreground. The careful attention to what might be needed without making the preparation itself into an event. That he had not specifically authorized any forgery. The third position, when Christine made clear to his attorney that the forensic evidence was not ambiguous, was that he had done what he had done in the belief that it was in my best interest. That he had been trying to protect me from the burden of property management during a grief period. That the money had been distributed to the family in ways that would ultimately benefit me as well because they maintained family stability. The fourth position, the one that arrived after Christine had made clear that the district attorney's office had been contacted, was that he wanted to discuss a resolution. I want to be honest about what I wanted during this period, because I think the honest version of my wants is more useful than a simplified version. I did not want to send my brother to prison. I want to be clear about that because it would be easy to read this story as building toward a satisfying punitive conclusion, and that is not where I was or where I am. Alejandro is my brother. He is my mother's son. He did something seriously wrong and the consequences of that wrongness were real and significant, and I am not minimizing them. But I did not wake up in the morning hoping for his incarceration. What I wanted was the restoration of what had been taken. The $215,000 in net proceeds from the Big Bear cabin sale. The return to a position as close as possible to where I would have been if the forgery had not occurred. I also wanted acknowledgement. Not a performance, a real acknowledgement of what had happened, why it had happened, and what it had cost me. And I wanted clarity about the Palm Springs situation and the family meeting, so that I had a complete picture of what had been decided about my life during the period when I was too grieved to defend it. Christine negotiated toward these goals. It was not a simple negotiation. Alejandro's attorney was competent and his early positions were as far from acknowledgement as possible. The forensic evidence and the threat of criminal charges were, as Christine had anticipated, the leverage that made negotiation productive. Without them, Alejandro's attorney would likely have continued to argue that the situation was a misunderstanding and that no formal remedy was warranted. With them, the conversation changed. The settlement took 4 months. Alejandro repaid the $215,000 from the Big Bear sale. Not in a lump sum. He did not have a lump sum available, because the money had been distributed rather than retained, but through a combination of a payment he made immediately from available resources, a structured repayment plan for the remainder, and the securing of certain assets of his as collateral. He provided a written acknowledgement of what had happened. This document, drafted by the attorneys, was specific about the forgery, about the unauthorized sale, about the distribution of proceeds without my consent. It acknowledged that my signature on the transfer documents had not been mine and that the transfer was invalid. The transfer was voided. This was legally complicated given that a good-faith buyer had purchased the property. The resolution required the buyer, Gerald Torres, to be compensated for his costs and inconvenience, which came from Alejandro's repayment, and the title to revert to me. Torres was, according to Christine, more cooperative about this than he might have been, possibly because he had had some awareness that the transaction was not entirely straightforward when he entered it. By the spring of 2019, I had the Big Bear cabin back on paper. I had the net proceeds from the sale restored through the structured repayment. I had the Palm Springs property intact. The criminal matter was resolved without charges being filed, based on the civil resolution and on the cooperation of all parties. I made this choice. It was mine to make. What I have not yet told you about is the letter from Marcus. I keep coming back to it because I think it is the most important thing in the story, and I have been building toward it, and it deserves its own telling. Marcus wrote the letter in the fall of 2017. Approximately 17 months before he died. He had been going through the process of updating the estate documents with Christine Park, and he had decided, in the process, to write a letter that would be in the safe deposit box with the other documents. He had not told me about the letter. He had not told me about it for the same reason he had not told me about the other protections, because telling me would have required a conversation about things he believed would be painful and that were not necessary unless they became necessary. When they became necessary, he was not there to have the conversation himself. So the letter was his way of having it. I am going to tell you what he said, not in his exact words because his words belong to me, but completely in terms of substance, because the substance is the point. He wrote that he had loved me for 18 years and that loving me had included loving my family because they were part of me. He wrote that he had also watched my family for 18 years with a different kind of attention than the attention of someone who was simply accepting them as the context they came with, and that what he had watched had produced specific concerns that he had not wanted to raise while everything was normal because raising them would have seemed like interference or alarm. He wrote that he was worried about what might happen to me if he died while I was still young. Not financially, he trusted that the financial structure was sound. He was worried about my capacity to protect myself during a grief period from the specific behaviors of people who loved me and who also, when resources were uncertain, moved toward those resources in ways that were not always in my best interest. He said he had watched my brother Alejandro manage the family's perception of financial decisions for years. He said he had watched him position himself as the family's financial authority and use that positioning to influence decisions in ways that benefited himself without always being transparent about the benefit. He said he did not think Alejandro was a bad person. He thought Alejandro was someone whose relationship with financial security had been shaped by early scarcity in ways that made him automatic rather than deliberate when resources appeared to be available and when the usual protective structures were absent. He wrote, "If I am gone and you are grieving, you will be in exactly the conditions that produce this behavior in him. I am not saying this to make you distrust your family. I am saying this because I want you to go to Christine first, and then to the safe deposit box, and then to make no property decisions for at least 3 months. If Alejandro is involved in any property conversation in the first year after my death, involve Christine before you involve him. That is not an insult to your family. It is a protection for you." He ended the letter with things that were between him and me. Things about our life, our 18 years, the specific texture of what we had built together. I will not share those because they are private, but I will tell you that reading them, sitting in a small room at a bank in Riverside, 7 months after he died, I understood something that I had not fully understood before. He had been paying attention the whole time. Not just to the investment portfolio and the property deeds and the estate documents. To me. To the specific shape of my life and my family and the ways they intersected. He had been carrying this knowledge quietly, using it to prepare carefully, protecting me in advance for a situation he hoped would not arise. That is a form of love that is not often described in the ordinary vocabulary of love, but that is one of the most real forms of it, the kind that sees clearly, prepares carefully, acts quietly, and asks for nothing in return. I want to tell you about what happened with my family in the year after the settlement, because the legal resolution was one thing and the family resolution was another, and they did not move at the same speed or toward the same place. My mother was present, in both conversations with Christine and in the separate conversations she and I had throughout that period, in the way I had hoped for. She was not defensive. She was not strategic. She was a woman in her early 70s who had trusted her eldest son's judgment in the automatic way of a specific cultural and generational formation, and who had understood, gradually and painfully, that this trust had been exploited in ways that had caused real harm to her daughter. She told me things I had not known. About the family meeting. About Alejandro's framing of what he was doing. About the moment when he had distributed the money, and she had understood that the distribution was happening faster than she had expected, and had said something to him that she now understood had not been a sufficient objection. She had said, "Shouldn't Rosa know about this?" He had said, "Rosa is not in a position to think about this right now. We're doing this for her." And she had accepted this. She told me this, and her face when she told me it was the face of someone who has learned something about her own capacity for looking away when looking away is convenient. I should not have accepted that, she said. No, I said. But I wanted to. She said this last part with a directness that I was not expecting and that produced in me something I did not expect. Not anger, but a complicated kind of understanding. She wanted to accept it because accepting it was easier than questioning it. She wanted to believe that Alejandro was helping because she trusted him, and because trusting him was easier than examining whether he deserved the trust. I know, I said. That is not an excuse, she said. I know that too, I said. My mother and I have been in something real since those conversations. Not what we were before. We were not what we should have been before, and going back to that would not be progress. Something more honest. She calls me twice a week. Not to manage me or to perform care from a distance, to actually talk. She asks questions and listens to the answers. She says things about herself that require her to be uncomfortable, which is not something she has historically been willing to do. I believe she is trying. I believe the trying is real. Isabel is a more complicated story. Isabel had known about the meeting. Isabel had agreed to the proposal. Isabel had benefited from the distribution. The debt relief that Alejandro had provided her from the proceeds was real and had addressed a situation that had been causing her significant stress. When everything came out, Isabel's initial response was to align with Alejandro. To argue that what had been done was in good faith. To position my response as an overreaction. This alignment broke down over time, partly because the evidence was not compatible with the good faith framing and partly because Alejandro, in the legal process, was less loyal to Isabel than she had been to him. When his attorney began looking for ways to minimize his liability, he disclosed information about Isabel's knowledge of the situation that she had not anticipated him disclosing. She was not legally implicated. She had not signed anything, had not forged anything, had not taken any action that was legally culpable. But her knowledge of what had happened before I was informed was on the record, and the record was not flattering. Isabel came to me, in the spring of 2019, with a specific combination of contrition and self-justification that was less complete than my mother's acknowledgement but more than I had expected from her. She said she had known it was wrong. She said she had told herself that Alejandro was going to tell me eventually, and that the distribution was going to be a fait accompli that I would be upset about, but that I would come to accept as having been done with good intentions. She said she had told herself that I had enough, and that the family needed what was distributed in a way that I, with Marcus's estate, did not. You told yourself I had enough, I said. Yes, she said. While Marcus had been dead for less than a month. Yes, she said. I know how that sounds. Do you know how it felt? I asked. She was quiet for a long time. I don't think I let myself imagine that, she said finally. That's honest, I said. It's not a good thing to be honest about. No, I said. But it's better than not being honest about it. Isabel and I have a different relationship than my mother and I have. It is more careful. The trust is more deliberately constructed and more consciously maintained. We see each other less frequently, and when we see each other there is a specific quality to the interaction, not hostile but aware. We are both aware of what happened and what it revealed about how she had thought about me. And that awareness doesn't disappear even when the conversation is about something else entirely. I am not certain what Isabel and I will be in 10 years. I am in it now, which is the only answer I have. Alejandro. We have not had a real conversation since the legal process concluded. We have been in the same room twice, once at my mother's birthday in 2019 and once at a family gathering in 2020. Both times, we managed the presence with a specific careful avoidance of people who have a great deal to say and have agreed, tacitly, that they are not yet ready to say it. He sent me a letter in the fall of 2019. I read it. It contained the specific qualities of a letter written by someone who has been advised to write it. Careful language, general acknowledgement of wrongdoing without specific accounting of what was done and why. expressions of regret that were genuine in their way but that felt managed in a way that his actions had been managed. He had done what he did with calculation, and he had written the letter with calculation, and the calculation was visible through both. I have not responded to the letter. I am not certain that I will not respond eventually. I am not certain that I will. I sit with the question the way I sit with many things in this period, without forcing it toward a resolution before the resolution is ready to arrive. What I know about Alejandro is this: he did what Marcus predicted he would do, in exactly the conditions Marcus predicted would produce it. That is not a forgiveness. But it is a kind of understanding that I think is more honest than simply calling him bad. He is not simply bad. He is someone whose relationship with scarcity and resources produced a behavior that, under specific conditions of opportunity and diminished oversight, overrode whatever breaks might otherwise have been in place. Understanding that does not make what he did acceptable. It makes it explicable. Those are not the same thing. The Big Bear Cabin. I went back in the summer of 2019. After the title was restored to me. After the settlement was finalized. After the legal machinery had run its course, and the paperwork reflected what should have been true all along. I drove up on a Friday afternoon in July. 4 hours, with traffic. I stopped at the grocery store in Big Bear Village that Marcus and I had always stopped at. Bought the things we always bought. The specific combination of provisions that had constituted our cabin trips across the 5 years we had owned it. I opened the cabin. It smelled the way it had always smelled. Pine and dust, and the particular quality of a mountain place that has been closed for some time. I opened the windows. The air came in. I made dinner. I sat on the porch and watched the mountains go dark. I went to bed in the room Marcus and I had slept in. In the morning I woke up before 6 and sat on the porch with coffee and watched the sun come up over the mountain that faced east. I thought about Marcus. About the fact that he had known. That he had prepared. That the preparation had been specific and thorough, and ultimately effective in ways that he had not been able to see because he did not live to see them. That he had done all of that. The documents, the attorney, the letter, the instruction, from love. Not from distrust, or from fear, or from a desire to control. From the specific form of love that sees clearly and acts on what it sees, quietly, without announcement. I thought about how many times I had sat in this specific chair on this specific porch with him. The ordinary mornings. The coffee. The quiet that was different from the quiet in the valley. Larger, more open, with more sky in it. I did not cry. I was past the crying, mostly. I was in the part that comes after the crying. The part that is not recovered but is ongoing, that is not healed but is functioning, that carries the loss as a permanent weight that you have learned to balance. I was in the cabin that he had loved and that I had nearly lost, and that was mine again because he had been careful. That was enough. Let me tell you about where things are now, because I believe in not leaving stories at their most dramatic point and pretending that is the ending. It is 2024. Marcus has been gone for 6 years. The Riverside house is still mine. I live in it. I have made it, slowly, over the years, less a house organized around 2 people and more a house that is mine in the singular way. This is not erasure. His photographs are still there, his books are still on the shelves, the kitchen is still organized the way he organized it because his organization was better than mine and there is no reason to change it. But the house is mine in a way that I have gradually accepted and that I no longer experience as loss, or not only as loss. The Palm Springs condo produces rental income. I have a property manager and I am not involved in its daily operations. It is an asset. It does what assets do. I am grateful for it. The Big Bear Cabin I use. Not as frequently as Marcus and I used it together. Some trips I still find difficult, still find the mountain air carrying more weight than just weather. But I use it. I went up 3 times last year. Once alone, twice with friends. The porch faces the right direction and the sunrise is still what it was. My professional life has evolved. I left the hospital coordinator position in 2020 and took a role at an estate management firm, work that emerged directly from what I had experienced, from the specific education of having navigated a complicated estate situation with someone who genuinely knew what they were doing. I help families understand their rights and their options. I am good at it in ways that are specifically connected to having been the person who didn't understand those things when she most needed to. Christine Park and I have an ongoing professional relationship. She refers clients who have complicated situations. I refer clients who need estate counsel. We have lunch every few months. She is, in the taxonomy of people who have been important to my life, someone who appeared at the right moment and whose competence and directness were exactly what that moment required. I want to tell you about something Marcus did that I have only understood fully in the years since his death. In the safe deposit box, with the other documents, was a folder labeled Plans. Inside the folder were notes Marcus had made at various points about things he wanted to do, places he wanted to go, projects he wanted to take on, changes he wanted to make to the cabin, to the property in Palm Springs, to the Riverside house. These were not grand ambitions. They were the ordinary plans of a person who was in the middle of a life and was thinking about what was next. A deck addition for the cabin. A trip to Portugal that we had talked about for years. A kitchen renovation for the Riverside house that we had been deferring. He had written these plans down and kept them in a folder in the safe deposit box, which means he had organized them with the same care he organized everything. Not as a bucket list, not as a dramatic accounting of what he had not done, but as a list of things to get to when the time was right. The time did not become right. He died 17 months after writing most of them. I have done some of them. The deck at the cabin, I had it built in 2021. Not because it was on his list exactly, but because I remembered he had wanted it and because it seemed like a good thing to do. It is exactly as useful as he had imagined it would be. I sit on it in the mornings when I am there. Portugal, I went in 2022. With a friend, not alone. We spent 10 days. It was not what it would have been with Marcus, and I did not pretend it was, but it was real and beautiful and the kind of trip that you carry with you afterward. The kitchen renovation, I haven't done it yet. I will eventually. I am not in a hurry. One more thing before I finish. In the spring of 2021, my mother said something to me that I have thought about many times since. We were at her house in Pomona. A Sunday afternoon. We were in the kitchen, the way we are always in the kitchen when we are at her house, because the kitchen is where my mother exists in her fullest version. She was making something. She is always making something, and I was sitting at the table with coffee. She said, Marcus was a very good man. This was not a new observation. She had said versions of it before. But this time she said it differently. She said it as a statement that contained more than the words. I said, yes. He was. She said, he saw things about this family that the family could not see about itself. And instead of running from it, he stayed and he protected you from the inside. I looked at her. She was not looking at me, she was looking at whatever she was making, in the way she looks at things when she is saying something she has thought about for a long time and does not want to make into more of a moment than it already is. He did, I said. That is a very specific form of love, she said. Yes, I said. It is. She said nothing more about it. We ate and talked about other things and eventually I drove back to Riverside. But she had said the thing that needed to be said, in the way she is increasingly able to say things that need to be said. Plainly, without drama, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon in the kitchen. My mother is changing. Slowly. In the way that people change when something has required them to. I am witnessing it. That is its own gift. The safe deposit box is still in use. I added documents to it in 2020 and again in 2022. My own estate planning, which Christine helped me update. My own letter, which I have written, and which will be there if it is ever needed. I organized it the way Marcus organized things, in folders, labeled clearly, with a note on the outside of the box that tells whoever opens it where to find Christine's contact information. I did not think, when I was 24 years old and a young married woman building a life with a man I loved, that I would need to understand these things so concretely. I did not think I would become someone who thinks carefully about the protections that need to be in place for the people who come after you. Marcus taught me to think this way. Not in explicit lessons, in the example of how he had thought about it. In the folder labeled important, for Rosa only. In the business card with Christine's number. In the letter that said call Christine if anything seems wrong. I think this way now. I teach others to think this way at work. What Marcus built with his care and preparation, I have extended. Not the specific documents, those served their purpose and some are no longer relevant. But the practice. The understanding that protection is love made concrete. That seeing clearly and acting on what you see, quietly and without announcement, is one of the most real things you can do for someone. I am a widow in Riverside, California, who goes to a mountain cabin in the summer and watches the sun come up from a deck that was built in the image of a plan someone made before he died. I have a family that is learning, at varying speeds and with varying completeness, what honesty costs and what it produces. I have a professional life built from the specific education of loss and recovery, and the documents in a safe deposit box. I am carrying what I am carrying. I am doing it in the manner of someone who has learned, from the person she most loves, that the carrying can be done with grace. That is enough. It is more than enough. It is everything. My name is Rosa Vega. I am 41 years old. My husband Marcus died in March 2018. He was 47 years old. He left me a letter and a business card and a set of documents that protected me from what came after. I found them in October 2018, when I finally went to the safe deposit box. The cabin is mine. The property is mine. The settlement is complete. My family is what it is becoming, which is different from what it was. And the deck at the cabin faces east. The sunrise is exactly what Marcus imagined it would be. I know because I watch it.